Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're plunging straight into the fiercely independent, sensory-rich world of medieval youth. We're going to reconstruct an entire human world today, but not a world of kings, brutal sieges, or grand political conquests. No, we're looking at the everyday, dirt-under-the-fingernails reality of children in the Middle Ages. We'll be looking really closely at their play, their toys, and the extraordinary ways they carved out a landscape of joy right in the middle of a deeply demanding civilization.
I want to immediately challenge a really profound historical misconception that you might actually be familiar with. For a long time, the prevailing assumption was just that medieval society viewed children as, well, loveless miniature adults. People thought they were put to work the second they could walk, without any real concept of childhood as we understand it today. But as we start to look at the actual evidence, a completely different and honestly much more fascinating picture emerges.
Recent archaeological discoveries and archival records have completely dismantled that old paradigm. Back in the mid-20th century, historian Philippe Ariès championed that little adults theory, but modern experts have totally proven him wrong. The historical consensus today shows us a society that recognized childhood as a truly unique developmental period. They deeply valued, protected, and deliberately nurtured a specific culture of play for their kids.
To really understand their world, we have to ground ourselves in the medieval intellectual framework they inherited from antiquity, which recognized distinct biological and social phases of human development. They called this the ages of man. So infantia was this time for physical growth and domestic nurturing. But take a look at puertia, spanning from ages 7 to 14. This was explicitly designated as the age of play. Play wasn't seen as just some idle distraction. It was considered an absolutely crucial mechanism for physical development and socialization. It was even protected by secular and canon laws that actually granted children moral exemptions from adult punishments.
That being said, we definitely have to acknowledge the harsh constraints of their reality. While a staggering 25% of infants died in their first year and nearly another fifth succumbed before they even turned 9, the evidence absolutely proves this brutal mortality rate never lessened intense parental affection. Parents fiercely loved their children. We see them providing them with toys, extended breastfeeding, and highly specialized medical care from midwives who would anoint newborns with salt and honey. So the cultural mandate for play remained incredibly resilient, even in the face of such tragedy.
Part 1. Toys from the Thames Mud. Let's turn to the archaeological record to reconstruct the surprisingly industrialized material culture of the medieval nursery. We're going to look at the actual objects these kids held in their hands. And it's fascinating to trace the deep historical lineage of pediatric craftwork because it doesn't just start in the Middle Ages. For instance, down in the ancient Tel Nagila site in Israel, archaeologists found 4,000-year-old miniature clay vessels with literal child-sized fingerprints baked right into the clay. These were early novice attempts at mimicry, where children impatiently tried to copy adult craftwork. And that innate human desire to play by imitating adults, that evolved directly into the bustling toy markets of the Middle Ages. By the 13th and 14th centuries, the distinct scent of hot pewter and wood smoke filled urban centers like London and Strasbourg. Artisans were casting thousands of miniature, non-perishable toys. We find hollow-cast lead tin alloy knights right in the mud banks of the River Thames, complete with little articulated jousting lances. These are the direct ancestors of the modern toy soldier. And over in places like Strasbourg Castle, we uncover miniature cooking plates and ewers. These weren't just trinkets, they were powerful socializing agents, designed specifically to prepare boys for the harsh realities of chivalric violence and girls for the incredible complexities of household governance.
And then there were the poppets, which were essentially dolls. Interestingly, these weren't usually shaped like infants, since girls were often already caring for real-life younger siblings. Pretending to be a mother to a baby was kind of redundant. Instead, these dolls mimicked adult high society fashion to help children rehearse marital and social roles. These puppets, like the wax models found in a 1943 cache at Exeter Cathedral, were so highly valued that historical court records actually document violent brawls breaking out over them, tragically resulting in a miscarriage in one 14th century French case. They were a really big deal.
Part 2. Winter on bone skates. When the weather turned, children adapted directly to the elements. Driven by the freezing constraints of the climate and utilizing the remains of their livestock, medieval children completely transformed frozen rivers into arenas of high-speed physical recreation. They created what were known as isleg, or bone ice skates. This was a brilliantly accessible technology crafted straight from the long, narrow leg bones of slaughtered cattle and horses.
And the technological evolution of the skate traces this direct line from a prehistoric Nordic survival mechanism to a highly competitive recreational sport, originating around 3000 BCE in Scandinavia just to literally survive the harsh winters. By the 12th century, these skates had reached London purely for winter recreation. Then, by the 14th century, Dutch skaters innovated by attaching metal blades, which finally allowed them to actually push off with their feet.
We can precisely reconstruct this bone technology today, which is pretty amazing. Children would flatten the dorsal side of the bone for stability, and then carve upward slanting toe picks to glide over small ice obstacles. But the real genius part is that the natural oily lipid marrow within the animal bone acted as a waxing lubricant, basically minimizing friction as it hit the ice. And since they couldn't push off with the smooth bone itself, they propelled themselves forward using these large iron-tipped wooden poles pushed right between their legs.
The 12th century English monk William Fitzstephen actually left us an incredible eyewitness account of this. His words perfectly capture the sheer sensory chaos and the danger of their recreational ice jousting, where boys literally charged at each other at full speed with their poles outstretched to knock opponents off their feet. As he noted, "He that falls breaks a shin or arm. They fly like birds across the ice." It was a rugged, thrilling, and frankly perilous winter pastime.
Part 3. Lawn games and martial law.
So, as the ice thawed, play became heavily intertwined with survival and warfare. The crucial point here is how play was essentially legally weaponized. Think about it. The English archery law of 1252 mandated that boys practice archery on Sundays to build formidable armies. It was childhood training that directly led to devastating military victories like the Battle of Crécy. On the flip side, kings repeatedly tried to ban mob football. This was a chaotic game played on festival days where chasing an inflated pig's bladder across miles of countryside almost always ended in village-wide near-homicidal riots and broken shins. Basically, archery served the state, mob football disrupted it.
But they also engaged in deep intellectual strategy when they were forced indoors. Take Nine Men's Morris, for example. This was an intensely popular game of geometric strategy. It was so completely ubiquitous that archaeologists find its 3 concentric square grids scratched everywhere. We find them in the dirt floors of taverns where peasants used pebbles, all the way up to the stone cloisters of cathedrals, where young novice monks carved boards right into the seating just to play in secret during long periods of liturgical study.
And this really illustrates their extraordinary capacity to improvise complex rules out of simple harvest refuse, effectively transforming everyday organic objects into competitive currency. In a game called Cobnut, they pitched large hazelnuts to demolish pyramids of smaller nuts. In Cherrystone, rural children tossed fruit pits into upturned ceramic pots, buried directly into the earth. We actually still find these target pots and clustered scatters of smooth pebbles in medieval village excavations today. It's like a snapshot of a game frozen in time.
Part 4. Liturgical subversion.
Finally, let's examine the profound psychological release valves of medieval society. During May Day celebrations, youth integrated directly into the physical landscape of their villages. They'd venture deep into the forest to bring in the green, crafting these intricate cone baskets of fresh foliage to leave anonymously on neighbors' doors. And, of course, they wove elaborate ribbon patterns around the maypole, dancing in alternating circles to ceremonially restore the natural order after the long, dark winter.
But perhaps the most radical performative play was the boy bishop tradition. Right around St. Nicholas Day or the Feast of Holy Innocents, cathedral choristers would elect a child from among their own peers. In an incredibly radical role reversal, this child would don a miniature jewel-encrusted mitre, hold a crozier, bless the populace, and actually preach sermons from the highest seat of power while the real adult clergy stepped aside.
And the exact moment the real bishop stepped down occurred during the chanting of these very words from the Magnificat. The rigid, unyielding hierarchy of the Middle Ages was temporarily and intentionally inverted by the youth right at the phrase, "and hath exalted the humble." It's just a stunning display of sanctioned subversion.
Along with the Feast of Fools, where youth and lower clergy would turn sacred altars into gambling tables, wear their vestments backward, and literally lead braying donkeys right into the church choir, these institutionalized rebellions were essential survival mechanisms. They allowed a heavily constrained, tightly controlled society to safely release mounting social pressures. For just a few days, the children and the lowly held the reins.
So, I want to leave you with this final thought. When we look at their mass-produced toys, their perilous bone skates, their improvised harvest games, and their subversive liturgical festivals, we really have to ask ourselves something. How does our modern definition of a good life, which is often highly supervised and sanitized, compare to the resilient, deeply sensory, and fiercely lively human condition of the medieval child? They didn't just survive their era, they actively interpreted, rehearsed, and carved out a vibrant landscape of joy within it. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the past, and I'll see you next time.